Welcome to Remembering the Forgotten, a space where leaders think out loud, without polish or performance. No scripts, no personas, just what becomes audible when the noise drops and the mind is free to speak for itself. These conversations are not about delivering insight, they are about thinking together in real time, testing ideas against stillness, letting two open minds stretch each other. The intention is simple: to create a space where clarity can emerge and where listeners don't just consume perspectives, but feel permission to engage their own thinking more honestly. Today, I'm joined by Deborah Myers. Deborah has spent decades working at the intersection of business, relationship, and intention. From international development and public affairs to founding Virtua Arte, a company devoted to restoring the human dimension of commerce. But this conversation isn't about gifting or appreciation as strategy. It's about relationship as a lived practice, about what happens when gratitude is not performative but precise, and how meaning returns when gestures are chosen with care rather than scale. Deborah brings a quiet steadiness shaped by years of cultivating trust across cultures and roles. She understands that the smallest act, when chosen with intention, can carry more truth than the grandest campaign. This is a conversation about presence over transaction. And with that, welcome, Deborah, to the show.
Well, thank you, Marcus. I think I'm going to have you give introductions to all of my talks. That was beautiful. Thank you so much.
So welcome. And I'm so happy to have you today.
I'm happy to be
So
here.
wonderful. So before we begin, when I speak of coherence, I'm pointing to a state where nothing inside is in conflict. Body, thoughts, emotions, and action aligned, moving as one. No push, no urgency, no fear driving the moment. And when I speak of stillness, I don't mean silence. I mean the part of you untouched by expectation or performance. The place that knows before the mind tries to manage it. That's the ground I'd like us to meet on today.
Okay. I think I can do that.
Wonderful. So let me kick it off with the first question, Deborah. Where can you just be yourself, untouched by expectation or performance?
So clarify that just a little bit. Where can I be? Um,
So where can you be just yourself,
oh,
untouched by expectation or performance?
well, I my first thought was in the shower. Yes.
That's a good one. It's the first, by the way. I never heard that as an answer yet.
Well, because and I'll be honest with you that that is a place, and I did this a lot when I was in undergraduate school. So when I had
Mhm,
writer's block, I couldn't think. I'd go take a
mhm,
shower, and that was the place where my mind would be wander free, and many times I would come up with something that then I would, as soon as I got out of the shower, would enable me then to continue writing or whatever I was doing. So there's nobody there. It's
mhm,
just me,
mhm,
and my mind can wander and things that maybe subconsciously that I have been thinking about start to come up. So
mhm.
yeah, that's my place, is the shower. and i
That's an
and i love
amazing
to
one.
I and I love taking showers. And my father used I had no problem as a child and young adult of taking 45-minute showers. And my father would just be pounding on the door saying, you have to get out of the shower. Don't use up all the hot water. So,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
that's my place.
That's amazing. So, what would you say is it about? It's not the shower stall, it is about taking a shower. So, what would you say is it about that shower thing?
It's about the water,
It's like
just
water.
yeah, just the water hot because I like hot showers. So the
Yeah.
hot water coming, hitting my body, whether it's my back, my front. But that's it. That's the sensation, or that's the thing that I
That is
love.
so fascinating. That's actually something we have in common.
Oh, yeah.
I can't stand cold showers. And if somebody really would hit the water, they would say, why is it, like almost hot? And
Mhm.
it's something that really does it. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that, but Sadhguru, he was in a conversation with Wim Hof, the guy who is
Mhm.
about the cold plunge stuff.
Yeah.
And he tried to share with him that it is anti-human being, this cold stuff, because it literally shocks your system.
Right.
And he said the water shouldn't be colder than the temperature of the body, not much colder, like 2 or 3 degrees max. And I totally understand why that is. And I'm not sure whether you knew that, but Wim Hof actually didn't come up with cold plunges or not. He tried to find a way to get through his trauma, I believe when he lost his family. And
Mm.
the only way to feel himself was to shock himself through the cold river.
Oh, no, I
And that
didn't.
became a phenomena in terms of cold plunges is basically the cure for everything today.
Yes,
And it's
which
not.
no, well, I, no, for me, I can't get into cold water. I can't. And, a story
Interesting.
is, um, so we had a friend who was very much into the cold plunge,
Mhm.
and he was an engineer, and he came over to our house and he said to Paul, I'll be happy to, build you a cold plunge thing, whatever, tank or whatever you call it.
Mhm.
And I was like, no, that's okay. I would never,
Not
never
needed.
use it. Never, and and everybody tells me who's done it, it clears the mind and blah 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 blah
Mhm.
blah blah. I'm like, I don't care. It's
Mhm.
cold and I don't want to be cold.
I understand that. If you think about that, many people literally need to shock their system to actually feel anything.
But that's sad.
That's crazy. But that's the
Yeah.
times we're in.
Well, yeah, and is that the reason? I mean, I'm going totally off in a different direction, but is
We are
that
allowed to do that. That's the
okay?
beauty.
All right. So, but is that the reason why, people get addicted to substance, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol,
Mhm.
because that's the only way that they can feel something.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that's terrible.
Mhm.
If that's the only way that you have to do something to you physically to your body in order to feel.
Mhm. So it's either to feel or not to feel. It's either to feel or to numb. Because quite
Right.
often with medication, for example, it's more the numbing process of your
Yeah.
feelings than actually the opposite. But I can
Yes.
tell you an example from of one of my family members. He got psychologically to a point where the only way how they can regulate his nervous system is through electroshocks.
Oh my goodness.
And you know who that person is?
Mm-mm.
My father.
Really?
Yeah.
So
So
if he doesn't have the shocks, what happens?
He's basically in a state of high depression.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So with him, the last 15 years, I literally observed a person working so much against himself and about his own system that his system shut down.
Hmm.
And it's only possible, and like from time to times, they were like 2 electroshock therapies a week. And I researched that quite a bit because, it was
Mhm.
sold to me like, it's just a normal procedure today. But if you need for your system to get jolted with electroshock,
Yeah.
isn't that quite a bit crazy, right?
Yeah. I would think so.
So let's stay with our hot shower.
Okay.
But it's literally the water. And Sadhguru said something different. He said the crown, like where babies have this spot which you should
Mhm.
never touch.
Right.
When water hits that spot, it does something to our body. It energizes our body. Do you
Hmm.
feel that as well? That when that spot is hit, it's like almost a spark?
Well, okay. I'm revealing a lot of stuff about myself. So, I only get my hair wet when I'm washing it.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that is no, that I have
That
to
makes sense.
I have to think about that in terms of does when I do that, does that happen? I don't know. I've never noticed.
Maybe
I
pay attention to it
I will.
consciously. It would be interesting.
Yes, I will do
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
it's no, for me, I don't know, as I said, it's just the hot water, you know, on my body. And
That's so
sometimes
interesting.
sometimes the hotter the better, you know.
Yes, I actually absolutely the same. Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. So let me move to another question, which is very much related to that.
Okay.
Was there a moment when the thinking quieted and clarity arrived on its own?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know.
It probably happened when you were really young.
Probably, probably,
Yeah.
but I don't recollect. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. It is actually interesting if you think about that, living in the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere more and more as well gets focused on the brain, on the mind, what's going
Mhm.
on in the mind. The heart becomes something like, hey, I belongs to it. But science says that even feeling takes place in your mind, if you think about that.
Yes, but I do have a strong, I guess, intuition because let me tell you that there have been times when I did not follow my intuition and
Mm.
I won't say I got into trouble, but it didn't work out. Let's just put it that way.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
didn't work out because my mind was trying to override,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
my
hmm
mind overrode my intuition.
hmm
So, yes, the mind can, feeling, I can say yes, feeling can come from the mind. But for me, there's also a very strong, as I said, heart intuition.
I love that because, when we look back at when we were children, for some it's a little bit hard to remember because so much happened in the meantime. But when you can remember, you remember that you had executive functions which are not as active or as present anymore today as they were when we were children.
Such as, give me an example.
Intuition,
Okay, yeah.
courage, creativity, all these C words, which are interesting.
Yes, but okay, so I would say in my case, creativity, I have still, that is something that's very, very strong, in me. And I use creativity in my business every day, and I know we're not talking about gift giving, but I do, if there's as some people said, my genius is I get that feeling, goes back to what we were talking. I get that
Hmm.
feeling in here when I find something and I think, oh, this is going to be the perfect gift because I
Hmm.
know it connects with the person. I know it
Hmm.
will connect with the person. Now,
Hmm.
my
Oh, by the
client
way,
may
I
not,
welcome you to talk about gift giving. I have no issue with that.
but so going back, so creativity for me is strong and has,
Mhm.
and has been um throughout my life. Now, I will say there were points where I wasn't doing things that encouraged my creativity.
Mhm.
When you're an undergraduate, you're studying and you're doing all
Mhm.
those all that all those things take up time in your in your
Mhm.
life, and you don't do the other things. But so creativity, definitely. As I told you, intuition, probably not as strong as when I was, younger, but still
Mhm.
I do have that feeling, and I get
Mhm.
that feeling and I know, where that's coming from.
Mhm.
Courage, you know, yeah, I'll step out there. Maybe not, I see other people who I can say definitely, their courage has they've lost their courage. I
Mhm.
think I still have mine. Maybe not
Mhm.
as, again, maybe I did things when I was younger that I, look back now and thinking that was really stupid. But
But it was fun at the time, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That's what
It fed,
matters.
it fed something else in me,
Yeah. Because you know what's interesting? When I recall our conversations, our prior conversations, Deborah, I think I even mentioned that before. I always felt that you have still a high working level of executive functions still present in you.
Mhm.
And I think it's true, right?
Yeah, I would agree with
And
that.
you see, why I do this show is partially because so many people have lost that almost entirely.
Oh, yeah.
And hearing from people who were able to preserve that, why that is. Sometimes it's actually even interesting for the person who says, you know what, I've never lost it. And then I say, why do you think that is? Oh, that's a good question. Never gave it thought to that. And sometimes to actually understand why things are is very helpful, even for the one who has it. So, what would you think it is that you actually preserve those executive functions?
Well, so I would say, particularly with, creativity, that was always important to me.
Mhm.
And, when I was younger, I expressed a lot about myself in, through creativity. Because as I tell the stories, I taught myself to sew. I
Mhm.
did, every craft, that was, came around. I tried it. I tried embroidery. I tried, knitting. And and I enjoyed those, those things. I say my parents had more paint by numbers, um, around the house than probably people even knew that, were, existed.
Yeah.
So that was always important to me. I did go through, a point where creativity wasn't, I didn't express it as much,
Mhm.
but um, I realized, as I got older, that that was just a really important, component of me,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so, and as I've said, I have now been able to incorporate that in,
Hmm.
in my work, in my business and, in what we do. So I think that um, is one reason why that particular um, function, has continued. And then intuition, as I said before, I think I won't say I lost it, but it was dormant, for a
Hmm.
while. But then, things started, things happen in life. And so I
Hmm.
started to explore that again. And so now again, as I say, and again, I use that in my business. And so that is strong also. So it's things that were important to me, I guess, when I was younger. And
Hmm.
then as I went through phases, like probably most people, where, those functions diminished, but now they're important to me again.
It's beautiful. Because, a couple of days ago, I was sitting on my bed and I was wondering, where did stillness come from in me? And as I explained, stillness for me is the coherence between mind and heart, which then opens to what people call the soul, or some people call it
Mhm.
intuition, or some
Mhm.
people call it creativity. It's
Right.
those executive functions. And I had that as a young child, but I had no clue where they came from. You know what I found out? My
Hmm.
grandmother, my father's mother, was suffering from schizophrenia. So she was schizophrenic, totally living in another world.
Mhm.
So spending time with her taught me stillness. Isn't that
Hmm.
incredible?
Mhm. Yeah.
And I thought, wow. So it's what you get exposed to and what you cultivate in very early years, sooner or later, will immerse again when you grow up.
It has for me.
It's an interesting aspect.
And I have,
So, mhm,
well, I will just say one thing, and is, and then once it started to reemerge, then I cultivated it, and I think that that's the difference from other people who it may reemerge, but for
mhm,
whatever reason they continue to try and dampen it.
mhm. I think it has a lot to do with society as well, because that's usually
Probably,
not what
yeah,
gets rewarded, right?
yeah,
Basically,
yes.
it gets subdued and totally overlooked that, let's say, creativity, intuition, courage, all these words are literally keys to the actual success, which is kind of crazy for me. So if I recollect what you just said, another question is for me, was there a time when you realized you were living someone else's life or someone else's
Oh yeah.
script?
Oh, yeah.
And what changed after that realization, Deborah?
So the answer is yes. And so I grew up in my dad was German and my mother was Mexican. So that was the
Mm,
cultural background that I grew up with. And so my dad was very dominant in
mhm,
our home, and he was very I mean, kind of laid the law down, and this is the way things
mhm,
are going to
mhm,
be. And so there was a time where what I was doing, um as I, became graduated from high school, went to college, that, when I would think about doing something, my first reaction was, well, what would dad think? or what would,
Hmm.
what would
Hmm.
dad say?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then it became, for me, it became intolerable, meaning that there were
Hmm.
things that I wanted to do, not, and I wasn't doing anything, illegal or crazy,
Hmm.
but, you know, they just, from, my dad's view of what life was and my view of what life was colliding. And so I finally said, screw this, and excuse my language, and I'm going to do what I want to do. So, I joined a sorority, and
Hmm.
for for the first year, didn't even tell my dad, and I was paying my own way through school. So it wasn't like my
Hmm.
dad was,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
was, I
You
was
didn't
doing
owe
something.
him anything, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Yes. Hmm.
You know, so I did that. My dad made it very clear, because I have a younger brother and sister, that it was expected that we would go to college, but we were expected to pay our own way. And so so I had saved enough money for the first 2 years of my undergraduate. And then, because of the way the financial assistance rules were, I had to, be declared independent and
Hmm.
not, from my parents. And so I, had gone through that, and my third year was ready to apply for um, for financial aid, and my dad comes back to me and says, I need you as a dependent on my tax return. So I will, give you the deduction that I get or whatever, which was, less than $1,000. And I was like, no, I'm not. I've just gone through 2 years of, trying to fulfill the requirements. And now you're asking me. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, okay, that didn't sit well. But those were the points where I was like, I, you know, I can't, my life cannot, I cannot be living my life, as my dad, the script that my dad, wants.
I love
So
that. And did you go through with that?
I beg your pardon?
Did you go through with that?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I did. And then,
Good
so
for
then,
you.
so then what happened was that I had to show,
Hmm.
um, to the financial aid office that I was not on my parents as a dependent on my parents' income tax. And so my dad, who was also quite paranoid about people knowing his not that he was wealthy or anything, but he was just paranoid of people
Hmm.
knowing about his, finances. So he did not want to give the school his income tax return, because then they would know.
Okay.
So, so I had to negotiate with the school that the
Wow.
the piece that my dad would give them was that piece that showed that I was not a
Yeah.
dependent, and that was the
Yeah.
only thing that they would get. And so the school agreed, and that's what happened. But yeah, so it was experiences like that where I was
Uh-huh.
just like, no, this is
How old were
absolutely.
you back then?
So that was 20, I was 20, 21.
It's still young for that.
Yes, but it was, that was, the situation. And, that I dealt with it differently than my brother and sister, dealt with that.
Hmm.
And I think the other thing that I think was really helpful for me in terms of, living my own life was my parents, I grew up in Southern California. And
Hmm.
so then I moved to Washington, D.C. So I was completely out of the
Hmm.
family orbit.
Hmm.
And I think that that was also extremely helpful for me, which my brother and sister never really did. And
Hmm.
so, I do, I can tell you, going back and visiting, and no matter how old you are, when it's everybody's home, you kind of revert back to those.
That is pretty much reality.
you know,
Absolutely.
those roles. So, but so for me, that was a huge, and when I moved to Washington, didn't know a soul. I
Mhm.
stayed with the friend of at somebody's house that was a friend of a friend of a friend. And you talk about courage. And I think I had maybe, $700 to my name. And I went to Washington. That's how I went to Washington.
Wow. And you know what's interesting? So thank you for sharing so openly. I love that. What it actually shows is you kind of laid the groundwork, especially with courage at a young age. And you
Yeah.
probably would not even call it courage anymore because it became so first nature for you.
Yeah, and another story with my dad. So I'm graduating from, this took courage. This really did take courage. So I'm graduating from,
Mhm.
undergraduate, and I decided that I had interviewed for jobs, and the jobs that I'd been offered were just not of interest to me,
Mhm.
and so I decided to that summer go to Sacramento, which is the capital, and do an internship, in one of the, state legislators' offices.
Mhm.
And my father was beside himself that I was not, taking a job and would have health insurance, because his view was you had to have, health
Oh,
insurance. And
interesting.
so I came home for Memorial Day weekend, which was the last, before summer, the
Mhm.
first, I should say, 3-day weekend. And so we got into, one of our, I guess, discussions, fights. And so, I told he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to go to Sacramento. I'm going to be an intern." And, he says, "And how much are you getting paid?" I said, "I'm not getting paid. I'm working for free. I get a stipend of like $200 or something like this."
Mhm.
And so my dad says to me, "If you think I'm going to support you this summer, you have another thing coming." And
Mhm.
I stood up and I said, "I wouldn't take any money from you. And if I have to sleep in the gutter, I will sleep in the gutter." And timing, I didn't, when we were having this discussion, I did not know this was going, but my ride back to school knocked on the door. So I just grabbed my things and I left. But it was,
Wow.
so yeah, so my dad was, upset with me. And then a couple weeks later, because graduation was a couple weeks later, my mom and my aunt were going to come to graduation, and my mother calls me and says, "Your father wants to come," and I was just like, "Oh,
Oh, he wanted to come.
yep."
And you
And
were not that amazed about
well,
that.
because we had just gone through this whole,
Yeah.
rigmarole about, and I didn't want to hear him, continue to,
Yeah, I understand.
criticize me for the decision, that I had made.
Mhm.
And so I said to my mother, "Okay, but, I had some things planned with, friends, and I said, This is what's going to happen, and
Mhm.
he has to, accept that this is what's going to happen." And
Mhm.
so he
Mhm.
came, and as he always was in public, everybody was like, "Oh, your father's so nice." And I'm like, "Yeah,
Mhm.
right." Thank you.
But he
But
behaved.
yeah, he did. Exactly. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so sometimes, it got to a point where I was just like, "No, this is what I'm going to do." And it was a friction, a friction with my dad all the way up until the end. So
It's quite often the case. So this leads me to an interesting question, Deborah. Um, you went into workplace, you went into politics, Washington, D.C., you mentioned. Were you able to keep that stance of yours? Or did you realize that business suddenly has different rules where old Deborah wasn't able to just be herself anymore, but she had to adapt to a
Uh,
style that wasn't you.
so uh, I had to make some, I had to adapt in some ways, but I, you know, and when I went to work, at the, international organization, which was
Mhm.
predominantly male, which was a Latin culture. So, that was the environment. Then I left there and I went to work in the pharmaceutical industry, which again is a predominantly male
Mhm.
environment. And so I had to make some adjustments, adapt to some things, but there were other things that no, I was a trailblazer in some things. And so I continued to be who I am. And it got
So
me in
that's
trouble.
amazing.
It,
Oh,
and
I
I,
bet.
it got me, in trouble. But, in the end, people remember not the things I did that got me in trouble, but the things that
Mhm.
I really helped in order to, to start, or, the things that were done, when I
Mhm.
was, in, at the various places that I worked.
If you were invited as an alma mater to your university and you would speak to women, what would you say to them?
Um, you know, I would say follow your intuition is one, um, and you know, take the opportunities that come because again, in when I went to Washington, I was not going to, I had no idea that I was going to stay. I was going there for
Mhm.
6 weeks. I was doing a volunteer job, and then was offered the opportunity to work with in one of the departments, and I was like, okay, I can do this. It was an opportunity that came to me. I in my career was an opportunity that came to me, and sometimes they said this is only going to be one time. The first I said the person said I only have a slot for 6 months, and I don't know what's
Mhm.
going to happen. And my view was, okay, I'll do it for 6 months. And then if I have to find another job, I'll, find another job. Well, I ended up in that particular position working for 4.5 years. I ended up representing the United States in various negotiations. And if I had said 6 months, oh no, what's going to happen? I don't know. I'm scared. All the opportunities that I had from that would have never happened, would have never taken
Isn't that
place.
remarkable?
Yeah, yeah.
So one advice would definitely be take a risk.
And look at, yeah, and take the opportunities. Because
Mhm.
when you say risk, people that immediately that
Yeah,
people,
yeah, yeah. I
but
do it
so
deliberately
yeah,
because it jolts them somehow.
yeah, it does. But what I would say is take the opportunities that come your way
Yeah.
because you
I like
just
that one.
don't know what could happen from there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, that taking that particular position, in the international organization, then gave me the opportunity to go into the corporate world. And, and that's when I went to work. I went to work for a French multinational company, American company, and then British multinational. So that all led to that. And if I hadn't done that, who knows what would have happened? And and people ask me, why did you ever leave, San Diego? And I was like, if I hadn't left San Diego, my career, my life would have been completely different than,
Mhm.
than what it was. And I viewed it as an opportunity. And again, San Diego is still there,
Mhm. Mhm.
all these years later, is still there. And, but I have had the opportunity to do so many things that if I had stayed and, you know, in my family orbit, there's no way I would have had the life that I've had. So
It's
it's,
interesting.
it's take the opportunities, take the risk, have
Mhm.
courage, and, things always work out.
So, what if the dean would ask you the following question? Deborah, you're looking back on a successful career in a predominantly male dominated world. What is the one advice for the women here going exactly into probably predominantly male dominated world in terms of business?
Speak up and stand your ground.
I love that
Yeah.
because that's what you've done, right?
Yes. And like I
That's how
said,
you earn the respect.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. My
I
husband used to
love
call me the
that.
buzz, when I was at the international organization, he would call me the buzz saw because I have to have this, and no, it's like, you want something from me, I have to have this, and don't come back until you have it.
Love
So
that.
yeah, it's, stand your ground and speak up.
That's fascinating. Another thing which I'm interested is when you are in stillness, in coherence with yourself, what can pull you out of it and what helps you come back to it again?
Uh, what can pull me out? Well, well, I want to say distraction, but it's more than it's the letting the overwhelm of everything that I view needs to get done.
Hmm.
Letting that overtake me. And
Hmm.
when I, kind of take a deep breath and then, sit back and really, kind of say, okay, what's important and what's not important, then that, you know, gets me back to coherence as you describe it.
Hmm. I love that. And in our pre-call, we talked briefly about the current situation that we're having in the United States. And you mentioned something really interesting because I asked you, how do you deal with the two camps on one hand, the ones who are hyper into something and the other ones who are fearful and, almost depressed and paralyzed. And you had a very interesting personal approach to that. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Well, as I said to you, is that I have my goals and things that I want to do to have an impact. And so I continue to focus on that and, taking the steps. Now, there are, as I said before, there are, days where I, can soar through the day and not get sucked into the environment, the
The
situation.
noise, right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly, the
noise.
noise.
Hmm.
And then there are other days that it's not as easy for whatever reason.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
it is important to me that I just continue to focus on what is important to me and not what's happening around me.
It was really interesting. I had quite a few conversations with people lately, and what comes up is, Marcus, this is quite egotistical what you're doing. And I personally believe, yes, it might be egotistical, but if we don't learn to focus on ourselves again, be clear about who we are and why we're here, I don't think anything is going to change soon
Uh,
at all. Do you agree with
Well,
that?
yeah, I do because the people who are out there, hyper creating, they're focusing on who they are and
Are.
what who they are and why they view their being here,
Mhm,
and they're doing what I'm doing, but in a
mhm,
different, in a different,
mhm, mhm,
I won't say a different way, but they're focused on what they want to accomplish, what impact they want to have. And so, yes, it is, to a certain extent egotistical, but it's the only way, that, as you said, things change. And those people for a long time were, in the minority, but they
mhm, mhm,
continued, they continued, they continued,
mhm, mhm,
voicing their positions, voicing their opinions, and now they're the ones who are out there, you know,
mhm,
creating the environment and chaos that we find ourselves in. So no,
mhm,
I
mhm,
agree with you. I think people need to, you know, focus on who they are and what their why is, as
mhm,
we talk about, and to move forward in that.
mhm. And you know what's interesting? I think we both believe in frequency and energy. And if I'm fearful, my ripple effects are definitely not positive nature.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that
But
100%.
if I focus on my why, on my purpose, on why am I here and what I'm here to do, I believe the ripple effect is so much more powerful than if I would go onto the street with a huge flag or whatever it is in the end and protest. Because you see, I mean, if we have coming to a place where coming people coming together believe that coming together actually changes something. And I believe we have to get to understand that we need to focus on ourselves, and this has the ripple effect we actually want to achieve. It's the grassroots effect in the end.
Hmm. Well, it ends up the grassroots is the effect is the way things change. I mean, let's face it, because every movement, everything that has happened, again, going back to what I said about the voices that are the most vocal right now, they were all started by, people who were, in the grassroots, and then,
Yeah.
picked up the energy as they went. So yes, I agree with you that we do, focus on ourselves, focus on our why, but then also, having a community that will help move the energy forward, so to speak.
Like-minded people in the end, right?
Exactly.
That's what it
Exactly.
comes down to. Yeah, that's interesting. Which brings me already to our last question. Deborah, if someone feels overwhelmed right now,
How
what
can they
would you
not?
want them, coming from your wisdom, I hope you have something in your toolbox. What would you want them to remember or return to?
Well, so I will say, there are days where I feel, just the noise around me is just overwhelming. And so there are days I don't want to listen to the news. I don't want to watch the news. It's something that my husband and I do together, but we watch, PBS, so we're not watching any of
Mhm,
the,
mhm,
the network. But there are days that comes to a point I don't want to, I just can't, I don't want to hear. I don't want to listen. I don't want to
mhm,
hear
mhm.
another word. So it goes back to what we were talking before, is get to that stillness. And, last night we heard on the news that, 40 people reading for, leisure, so to speak,
Mhm.
is down 40%. And I'm like, really unbelievable. And
That is unbelievable.
so to get to that, to that stillness, it's not getting on the phone and,
Yeah.
scrolling. Get a book, get, or listen to a book or listen to something just to calm your mind down and enable you then to start, you know, getting clarity or just being able to think, on your own and not, having the noise constantly influencing you. And I
I
read and
watched,
I read for leisure, so
you
that's,
do, right? You
exactly.
do. The thing I'm saying now definitely resonates with you, Deborah. I watched a little clip about Generation X, Gen X, and they said, we used to have something which is totally lost today, and that thing is called critical thinking.
I agree.
So do I. So do I. Critical thinking. So
Hmm.
whoever feels like, I don't know what these guys are talking about in terms of critical thinking, look it up. It is something I highly recommend to take
Yep.
on. So with
I
that, Deborah, thank you so much for having been my guest. It's been a great pleasure
It
talking
has
with you.
been a pleasure always. Thank you.
This was Remembering the Forgotten, a conversation held in clarity, not performance. If something in this exchange shifted how you see, let it stay with you. A few quiet pointers are waiting below.